This slide provides you with an overview of some of the major theoretical perspectives of human sexuality. These are all psychological theories, so if you take another human sexuality course in a different field, such as sociology, you'll be exposed to a whole other set of theories. These theories are listed in order from oldest to newest. None of these theories are better than the other. However, each of them provides unique insights into the diversity of sexual behaviors and attitudes. If you've taken any of my other courses, especially intro, you know that I have a deep dislike for teaching Freud. I should have known when the department asked me if I wanted to teach this course that there was no way I was getting around it. So hopefully, for your sake and mine, this is the only time we have to talk about him. So the oldest theory in psychology regarding human sexuality belongs to Sigmund Freud. Freud believed that human behavior was driven by sex and death. According to Freud, our personality consisted of the id, ego, and superego. The id operates according to the pleasure principle. It seeks instant gratification and needs fulfillment. The ego exists to keep the id in check and operates under the reality principle. It tries to satisfy the id's desires in a rational way that avoids self-destruction. The superego is like our conscience. It tries to persuade the ego to do what is moral. Aside from personality, Freud also proposed a theory about psychosexual development. This theory says that children pass through 5 stages: oral, anal, phallic, latent, and genital. If a child doesn't pass through one of those stages, they become fixated, which leads to a lifelong urge to gratify the relevant body part from that stage. So for example, if someone gets fixated on the oral stage, they may wind up developing a habit of chewing on their nails as an adult. This theory is also the theory associated with the Oedipus complex, which is when a boy hates his father and finds his mom sexually desirable, as well as penis envy, which is when a girl experiences psychological trauma due to their lack of a penis, and the Electra complex, which is when a girl experiences sexual desire for her father. Do you see why I hate teaching Freud? While he did get the ball rolling regarding studying human sexuality within the realm of psychology, many of Freud's theories have been rejected. We can't scientifically test his work because it's based on case reports of his patients. Additionally, they're also sexist. For example, he believed women who could orgasm through vaginal intercourse alone were more mature than women who needed clitoral stimulation. And on that note, let's move on. Next up was behaviorism. When the field first started, behaviorists thought that it was impossible to measure mental processes. However, the field later began to acknowledge and address the role that cognitive processes play. One of the main ideas of behaviorism is the idea that behaviors are learned from experience. Also, through this learning process, appropriate behaviors can come to replace previously learned behaviors that are ineffective or maladaptive. The major types of learning that emerged from this movement were classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and social or observational learning. From your intro class, you should be familiar with the term classical conditioning. If not, the name Pavlov should ring a bell. Oh, sorry for the pun. I'm going to quickly review this in case you forgot, but don't worry, I'm not going to test you on the terms conditioned stimulus, unconditioned reinforcer, etc. In classical conditioning, we pair a neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus. The unconditioned stimulus elicits an unconditioned response. With time, the neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus, which elicits a conditioned response, which was formerly the unconditioned response. So if you took my intro class, the diagram on this slide may be familiar to you. This is an example of how classical conditioning works in human sexuality. So as we can see in this diagram, if our partner has onion breath and they kiss us and we find kissing arousing, we may with time also find onion breath to be arousing. Classical conditioning has been implicated in a variety of sexual behaviors, including fetishes. It can also be a helpful way to treat sexual difficulties. Classical conditioning doesn't give us a full understanding of all behavior. Operant conditioning helps explain some gaps in why we behave the way we behave. The main idea here is that we're either reinforced, which tends to increase our behavior, or we experience punishment, in which behaviors are decreased. Reinforcement and punishment are most effective immediately after the behavior, and reinforcement is typically more effective than punishment. Operant conditioning is very applicable to the study of sex because sex is not only a behavior that can be increased or decreased through reward and punishment, but sex is also a reinforcing variable that can increase or decrease the frequency of other non-sexual behaviors. For example, operant conditioning is very applicable to the study of sex because sex is not only a behavior that can be increased or decreased through reinforcement and punishment. For example, people who typically experience enjoyable consequences from sex, like bonding or a sense of closeness, will likely have more sex. And here is a fun example of how sex can increase non-sexual behaviors. Studies have shown that those who do more housework have sex more frequently. Once again, though, operant conditioning doesn't tell the whole story. Social or observational learning says that some behavioral tendencies are acquired through simple observation of others' activities. If we see people being rewarded for certain behaviors, we might imitate them, and vice versa. We might see how social learning theory influences sexual behaviors of high school students. For example, boys may be more likely to engage in sex if they see that their sexually active peers receive praise. Additionally, we also see that the more sexual content a teen is exposed to in popular films, the earlier they start to have sex, and the less likely they are to practice safe sex practices. Although these theories provide some insight into human sexuality, they have been criticized for being oversimplified and depersonalized, as well as failing to address biological and hormonal influences on behavior. Exchange theories help us understand how social relationships are formed, maintained, and end. The main idea here is that the way we feel about a given relationship and behave towards our partner depends upon the type of outcomes we receive in return for what we have to put into the relationship. So, relationships are essentially about give and take. When our exchanges have high rewards and low cost, we tend to maintain that relationship. But if the costs exceed the benefits, we're likely to end that relationship and move on. To determine if the rewards we're receiving are good, we turn to comparisons. Comparison levels help us judge our relationships. We might do something like compare the outcomes of our current relationship to a past one, or compare our relationship to a friend or family member. We're looking for a cost-benefit ratio that is favorable to our comparison level. And favorability often depends on equitability or fairness. So, are we getting what we feel that we deserve? When it comes to relationships, particularly heterosexual ones, sex is a resource that tends to be exchanged for specific outcomes. Women tend to be the sellers, and men are typically the buyers. However, this doesn't mean that all women, or even most of them, go around trading their bodies for resources. It just means that when sex is exchanged for some other outcome, women are typically the ones offering it. Social exchange theory has some criticisms. Not all relationships function on a cost-benefit analysis, and many people in relationships do things for their partners purely for altruistic reasons. Next, human sexuality research began to focus on personality psychology, or the study of relatively stable, intrapsychic factors that generate consistent patterns of behavior. These factors play an important role in understanding sexuality. So let's start with a term that you're probably familiar with, the Big Five. We can get a pretty good sense of what a person is like based on where they stand on 5 factors: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Extroversion and agreeableness are the 2 factors that have most consistently related to sexual behavior. Aside from the big five, other personality traits such as erotophilia and erotophobia affect our sexual behavior. Those who experience erotophilia tend to have strong positive emotions and attitudes towards sex. Those who experience erotophobia tend to experience strong negative emotions and attitudes towards sex. Where someone falls on the scale of erotophilia and erotophobia has implications for their sexual behavior. For example, among women, greater erotophobia is linked to less sexual satisfaction and less consistent contraception use. Another relevant trait is sensation seeking, which is our tendency to pursue thrilling and risky activities. People who are less sensitive to the effects of dopamine may need to continually engage in thrilling activities to achieve the same psychological highs as everyone else. Research has found that sensation seeking has been associated with sexual risks, including having larger numbers of sexual partners and a greater frequency of unprotected sex. Possibly for this reason, sensation seekers are more likely to contract an STI. The last trait we'll talk about is sociosexuality, which refers to a person's willingness to have sex in the absence of commitment and without an emotional connection to their partner. Those who identify as restricted sociosexual require feelings of closeness to a partner before having sex and tend to seek out more long-term relationships. In contrast, those who identify as unrestricted sociosexual do not need to establish an emotional connection first and tend to seek more short-term relationships. The more unrestricted a person's sociosexual orientation is, the more frequently they have sex and the more sexual partners they report. This orientation is also linked to greater impulsivity and higher likelihood of unprotected sex. Despite what the media shows you, there is more variability in sociosexuality among men and women than between them. Yes, on average, men are more interested in casual sex, but this isn't true for all men. And yes, some women are totally fine with casual sex. Personality also has some limitations. For example, some of the scales used in personality research tend to measure attitudes more than enduring traits. Additionally, some personality traits are accounted for by genetics. So it's hard to determine whether the behavior is due to personality or biology. One of the more recent theories comes from evolutionary psychology. One of the main ideas about human sexuality from an evolutionary perspective is that we have a motivation to produce as many offspring as we can. To accomplish this, we've developed preferences for specific physical and psychological characteristics in our romantic and sexual partners. These traits are those associated with successful reproduction. For example, heterosexual men tend to be attracted to young, hourglass-shaped women, which signifies that she is healthy and capable of bearing children. Another component of evolutionary psychology is that men and women develop different approaches to mating. From the perspective of sexual strategies theory, these differences evolve because the parental investment required to produce a child differs across the sexes. Specifically, the investment required by men to make a baby is relatively small. Some of them can do their part in under a minute. Evolutionarily, it's in a man's best interest to have sex with as many fertile women as he can. In contrast, the investment a woman makes is huge. To maximize women's success, it's in their best interest to look for men who are going to stick around and provide the resources necessary for raising a baby. There are some criticisms of the evolutionary perspective. For one, evolutionary psychologists struggle to explain why variations in sexual orientation exist. Additionally, sex differences in attraction and mating preferences have been overstated, and that some of these differences can be reduced or eliminated when certain social factors are taken into account. For example, women tend to be judged more harshly than men for being sexually active. Each of the previous theories has its limitations, and it's clear that psychology is only part of the picture. We will adopt a biopsychosocial perspective when we talk about human sexuality. From this perspective, we can view sexuality and human behavior as the products of biological, psychological, and social forces. So the biopsychosocial model takes a more holistic approach to the study of sex. It considers the entire person and how the mind and body are interconnected. It allows us to consider multiple factors at once. Additionally, it puts sexual health on a continuum that runs from wellness to illness.